Today we're going to be looking at The Daevites by the Exploring series. As always, I'm going to be leaving a link to the original video and channel down in the description below, so go ahead and make sure that you check them out. So it's been a while since done an actual group of interest within the SCP universe, and The Daevites, I believe I've heard their name get tossed around here and there. I don't remember anything too specific about them, so this is going to be kind of like a nice little fresh look. So let's go ahead and get to the actual video. But before we do, don't forget to like, subscribe. It really does help me out a lot. Hit that notification button right there. Or get notified every time I do upload. Sometimes I'm uploading twice a day. Now I'm working on them whenever I can and releasing them at some point the next day. That way you at least have one daily video to watch at your leisure. So without further ado, let's go ahead and see what the Daevites are all about.
The Daevites. The study of ancient cultures, civilizations, and events is of course one largely focused on the past, with occasional new discoveries in the present providing new details, but the past is largely set in stone. The history of the Daevites, however, within the SCP universe, is one that has a very curious connection to time, existing in the past, of course, but ever creeping into the present. It wouldn't be an SCP topic without some sort of anomalous context, and so this video will discuss the Daevites, their strange expanding history, and some of the other SCPs related to them. Unlike some other groups or factions in the SCP universe, the Daevites are based primarily around a single SCP, SCP-140. SCP-140 is a book titled A Chronicle of the Devas, copyrighted sometime in the 1900s and written by an unknown author. Oddly, there are far more pages contained in the book than could actually be held by the binding, but that's just the beginning of its anomalous properties. Those who read the book feel paranoia, unease, and nausea, potentially due to the unsettling material held within, although some do claim to smell the odor of dried blood coming from the book. Regardless, readers feel compelled to continue reading the book, calling the text fascinating. Additionally, if SCP-140 comes into contact with any fluid, more text will be added to the book, and so, due to the fascinating compulsion,
Like any type of fluid, or it seems like blood would probably be like the main thing here. I mean, because they said that they smell dry blood, right? So it's probably not that they're because I kind of got the idea that they were gonna be more worshipy, just because like one of the pictures showed like a little cult type setting. But I mean, it doesn't seem like they maybe worship it. It's seeming that maybe they're just reading it, and that there's a group of people, maybe they try to spread it by getting other people to read it. Don't see any benefits in it if it's supposed to cause you to have paranoia.
That readers have, they will attempt to bring any fluid they can to the book to add to it, including their own blood. The book itself is of course a chronicle of the Davite civilization, which existed thousands of years ago, originating in what is now south-central Siberia. At times, the Davites operated as a collection of city-states, and their civilization of course evolved and changed over time, but primarily they functioned underneath a theocratic aristocracy. The majority of the Davites served under a ruling class known as the Devas, who routinely practiced cannibalism and magic rituals. Evidence suggests that the Devas unnaturally extended their lives, possibly because of these rituals, and that in fact they were different enough from modern humans to be considered a separate species. The civilization as a whole believed in human sacrifice and blood rituals, and they were largely a militaristic society, conquering their enemies and building large urban centers on the backs of slave labor. It is believed that the Davites were a matriarchal society, in which women generally possessed higher status than men. The book goes into great graphic detail about the different blood rituals, sacrifices, battles, conquests, and even the daily life of the Davites.
Okay, so the book has the information about the Davites, so I'm assuming that the people who, I guess, would have that book in their possession are descendants of this Davites. I mean, I don't know if they could be Devas, because Devas obviously being the upper echelon. It's kind of reminded me of the Sarkics that I saw a while back. Maybe they just may have been the cannibalism, but Yeah, a lot of mystery.
Archaeologists working for the SCP Foundation have discovered ruins and different artifacts from the Davite civilization in locations such as Siberia, northern Iran, Mongolia, and China, signifying that this culture did actually exist. The Davites apparently created a number of anomalous artifacts and creatures, some of which have been found and contained by the Foundation, and the rest seemingly lost in time. An early reading of the book showed the Davite civilization being utterly crushed by the Chinese, killing off practically all of the Devas and ending their reign. In most history books, that would be pretty much the end of the Davite story, but this is where the true anomalous properties kick in. As mentioned, fluids that come into contact with the book add to its contents, but not just adding details to existing material. It also changes and adds to their history. Their defeat at the hands of the Chinese was changed to a mere setback, along with other defeats, and new individuals and events are continually added. By itself, this would be...
Wait, so the way he was explaining it right there, it seems like it could change what has happened in the past. Now, I might just have heard that wrong, but when he said that they were utterly crushed, but then when it had blood added to it, that it ended up saying that it was just a setback. So what kind, like, I mean, I'm assuming that that's where the time thing comes in, where he mentioned it in the beginning. But I can already feel this is gonna get way more complicated and tricky to actually try to understand.
merely interesting, but the fact that Foundation archaeologists discovered new artifacts and materials that
I swear to God, there's always so many noises the moment I start recording. Like I literally picked the awkward times during the day to do it now, and there's always so much noise going on. I'm really hoping it's not picking it up on the mic, but considering this mic is very sensitive, it probably is.
match this new history means the world's timeline is actually being rewritten along with it. Right now, the Davite timeline ends hundreds of years ago, and modern history seems to be unaffected by these timeline changes. But if SCP-140 keeps getting added to, it could result in a complete restructuring of the modern world. Fortunately, SCP-140 is locked up tight by the Foundation, but unfortunately, a number of identical copies are out in the world, each capable of adding to the Davite history. So far, the Foundation have found and destroyed dozens of copies, but at this point, 2 expansion events have occurred while SCP-140 was contained in its vault. SCP-140 represents a massive danger to the current structure of the modern world, and recovery of the other copies is a top priority.
But like, are these copies because they were made by Davites, or is it just like a copy that someone made because they saw the book, or is it maybe made of a special material? I mean, I haven't heard really what it's made of. Only thing is that it's a book. But I mean, I would assume there have to be some kind of conditions, maybe a certain type of material that they would have to do, maybe a ritual to make the book actually work, or if it just works just because someone made a copy somehow.
The Davites are mentioned in a number of other SCPs contained by the Foundation, and that number is only likely to grow as time goes on. But I'll take the time to just discuss a certain few. There are several SCPs that refer to the Deva's rituals, specifically in connection with botany. SCP-392 is a plant species created by the Davites in 800 BCE, resembling a peach tree, but instead of growing fruit, it grows human heads. These heads are all physically identical, believed to be the head of a male sex slave who served a Deva, but the heads lack eyelids and contain an SCP-392 seed in their skull cavity. These heads respond to certain physical stimuli, such as their eyes following a moving hand, and seem to respond more actively to females than males. When removed from the tree, either manually or when they fall off, the heads cease activity and begin to decompose, with the decomposing head serving as fertilizer for the seed, if possible. SCP-3140 are massive tree-like entities, believed to have been used for warfare by the Davites around 11,000 BCE, although the leading theory is that they were originally created by SCP-1000, sometime prior to that, and simply...
Bro, what is up with Bigfoot, man? SCP-1000. They've literally got a hand on every single thing. I don't know. I mean, it's probably just the people that wrote them that they're trying to incorporate them in some way or some form of fashion. But it's just saying like they're popping up a lot more frequently.
Modified by the Davites. SCP-3140 stands about 12 meters tall, although it's possible ancient members of the species stood much taller, and seem to be formed from a mixture of the Tibetan cypress and the Japanese cherry, with wooden legs possessing full articulation. SCP-3140 is covered in a large number of glyphs, tattoos, and Davite iconography, and also possess 3 large barrels attached to it, although it's believed that these barrels were a later modification, as they are not present on newly born members of the species. Anyone that places their left hand in a specific recess on SCP-3140 and speaks a command in Davik can order the entity to follow certain directions. These commands include moving, stomping, stabbing with extendable bone spikes, and presumably firing some incendiary substance from the barrels, although the entity contained by the Foundation only billows smoke when given the fire command. SCP-3399
When given the fire command, so either they have a Davite in, I guess, custody or containment, or they know the language to do. I don't know if he said it was a ritual, but he just said that you had to say something in Davite to get it to be able to do these things.
9 is a species of trees activated by the blood of an individual that will grow leaves that display images resembling memories carried by the individual. Seeds grown from these trees will begin to show images on their leaves of potential future events, usually partners whom the individual could conceive a child with. Future trees grown from the seeds will continue to show future events related to the potential offspring, and the trees grown will also reflect any genetic disorders carried by the individual that would be passed on to offspring. It's believed these trees were utilized by Davite royalty to help craft the best bloodlines. There are also references that connect both the early ancestors of the Church of the Broken God and the Sarkic cults to the Davite civilization.
I did mention the Sarkics. I like how it's all coming together.
It's believed that Sarkicism originated from Davite slaves that overthrew their rule, eventually going to war with the Davites. The Sarkic cults originally crushed the Davite civilization, but thanks to SCP-140, the Davites bounced back once again. The Mechanites...
Wait, real quick. So obviously the book, when it gets ink, it can change what's happened in the past, specifically relating to Davites, right? But why is this the case? I don't think I've heard anything about it so far. Or what? I mean, I didn't even hear. God, if he said it, I just completely missed it. As far as the actual origin of the book, how it came to be, and I know there's multiple ones, but I'm just gonna use one for example. How did it come to be? I mean, it's just kind of one of those things that was already always there. Just like it's just that way because it's that way. It's anomalous, right? But yeah, okay. So the Sarkics did defeat them, but then ended up changing.
Likely one of a large number of smaller cults amidst the Davites, broke away from the Davites and were at best temporary allies against the Sarkics, and most likely indifferent towards the Davites. The Davites seem to have clashed with a number of kingdoms and religious organizations, and as time keeps getting rewritten, so does the number of their conflicts grow. The Davite civilization is one intertwined with blood rituals, human sacrifices, slavery, and the anomalous, but those concepts would be considered mostly standard fare for an ancient civilization in the SCP universe. SCP-140 is really the most perplexing element in their history, as it's believed by some that the Davite civilization didn't even exist in our timeline until that book's publication. One of the most commonly accepted theories is that the Davite kingdom existed in an alternate dimension, and some process resulted in them intermingling into ours. Whether the process responsible for this is one of the Davites' rituals or some other third party is up in the air. But the damage is already done and will likely only continue to grow worse. Additionally, it's also debatable if the Mechanites and Sarkics would have existed without the presence of the Davites, or if SCP-140 is also responsible for their creation as well. It's generally accepted that the past stays in the past, but when it comes to the Davites, the past keeps creeping up.
Alright, so a little confusing because technically it doesn't matter what happens to them, it can always change the past, and then obviously that's going to have some form of effect in the future, although they did say at one point that it didn't necessarily have a huge impact on, say, the world, and it seemed to mainly focus with the actual Davites themselves. So this is one of those, and also the part about the Sarkics and the Mechanicus, the other group that they just mentioned now, that, if I remember correctly, is a part of the Church of the Broken God. It seems like some of those wouldn't have ever existed if it wasn't for them. So technically, would that mean that those two groups as well would be considered technically from a different or dimension as well, along with the Davites? But I mean, it's kind of up in the air. I mean, this video was done a few years ago, so I'm pretty sure the Davites themselves have been expanded on. I do see here he's got a one called More Davite, or it's called the More Davites SCPs. So be checking those at some point here. So just try to get a little information, because it seemed like a lot of this was mainly focusing on the SCPs that are related to them or like have some form of association with them, and a little bit of information on the actual Davites themselves. And I'm really hoping I'm saying Davites correctly. So, but I mean, other than that, I don't really have too much else to say. I mean, if anybody has some more information on them, I'd be more than willing to read about it in the comments. But other than that, that's going to go ahead and do it for this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, really does help me a lot. Hit that dislike button if you didn't like it. It helps me improve the channel. If you're curious to see what's coming up next, check the description down below. You're going to see a list of about 5 videos. From top to bottom, it's going to be how I view. But until then, I'll see you all in the next video. Bye.